We are just 3 days out from Election Day, and nearly 67 million Americans have already cast their ballot. That's a lot of people, folks. Target Smart now has details about who is voting early this year. Registered Democrats are outpacing registered Republicans by just 1 point in the early vote. But women, they are showing up in greater numbers than men by nearly a 10-point margin. Now, if that trend holds, it could be a game changer for the Harris campaign. Last night in Wisconsin, Harris reminded voters why their voices matter.
Let us be intentional about building community. Let us be intentional about building coalitions. Let us remind each other and others that we have so much more in common than what separates us. Let us do that. There is power in that. It will strengthen our country. And we'll remind folks also, your vote is your voice, and your voice is your power.
Joining us now is former Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill. She is an MSNBC political analyst and the host of the How to Win podcast. Obviously, someone that knows a lot about elections.
Good morning, Senator. Welcome to the table.
Hey, it's good to be on the weekend. Let's go.
Let's rock and roll. The Senator's in the house.
I'm not dancing, Michael. I'm not doing it.
I just dropped the mic for the Senator. Look, this is what's interesting about this moment, and I like the way we came into this conversation because I want to pick up on what the Vice President was saying about your voice being your vote being your voice, and your voice is the power you have. She talks about making progress, and I want to ask you whether or not that's something that's finally beginning to resonate with voters. Let's take a listen to the Vice President on making progress.
I am not looking to score political points. I am looking to make progress. I pledge to listen to those who will be impacted by the decisions I make. I pledge to listen to experts, to listen to people who disagree with me. Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe that people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table.
With more and more stories coming out of American families, communities around the country of women facing draconian abortion laws in which their lives are at stake, the politics of Donald Trump in the last few weeks being more divisive, more ugly, does this idea finally resonate with voters out there as they're going to the polls that this democracy is worth keeping? A president is someone who should lead us, not create fear in us. How do you see her closing message resonating with voters as they're now in the booth?
Well, I think, the fact that she's aspirational and hopeful and positive and saying that we can all get along and I'm willing to listen to people who disagree with me and not sick the police or the military after them, I think it's a big deal. But the other interesting thing about this closing argument, when she says your vote is your voice, underlying that is the fact that it's intensely personal and private. And what I've been fascinated by is how the Trump campaign has reacted to the notion that a woman has the right to go in the ballot box and vote however she wants and never tell anybody.
It really ticks them off.
And all of a sudden they're talking about how dare a woman not vote the way her husband does, and how dare a woman, lie to her husband about how she's voting. And I think
that helps the argument.
I think even Charlie Kirk said something nutty like he's given her a good life, and how dare she not, obey what he says. And then Trump says things like, I'm going to take care of you whether you like it or not. They keep stumbling over the fact women are frankly not going to respond to you are our agent. Women, men are in charge. And his whole thing about trying to get the bros out to vote, every time he does that, every time Hulk Hogan rips off his shirt, there's another suburban Republican woman that said, nope, not doing that. Not doing that.
If I have to hear Macho Man one more time at a rally,
or
then I am out of here.
Or it's a man's world.
There are positive indicators for Democrats. You saw the Gallup polling, sort of looking at the enthusiasm between Democrats and Republicans. That's one indicator. But you sort of had a different indicator that you talked about with me in the makeup room, and that's where Donald Trump is choosing to be in these last days.
Yeah, I think that him going to New Mexico was just a head fake. But he's going to North Carolina 4 times. You know, if you're a Republican and you're going to North Carolina 4 times in the last 2 days of the campaign, you're worried about North Carolina. And they're sending him there because their internal data is telling them that she's doing better there than I think perhaps the polling is showing us right now.
Which you think is about what?
I think it is more about a high percentage of college-educated folks in North Carolina, a significant vote of color, much higher than Wisconsin. And those are places where she is really distancing herself. And I think, frankly, some of it is they really bumbled, I think, the hurricane relief stuff. People on the ground know they're getting help. People on the ground know that FEMA has been there. They know. Maybe the small little percentage of the cult wants to believe some of the conspiracy theories, but most North Carolinians know the federal government responded and responded well, and it made him look like a liar once again, which is almost as common as the sun coming up.
Talk about it now, Senator. Look, what I have really been struck by in this entire election, particularly since the vice president became at the top of the ticket, while Donald Trump says volatile things on the campaign trail, he, is talking about his enemies. He's doing all of these things. The campaign, the Harris campaign, has been very consistent in the ads that they are running. And they are talking about, they've done a lot of bio ads, right, introducing her to folks. They're doing the contrast, making sure people see what Donald Trump has said. But she's also talking affirmatively about her economic message. And I think that's also part of why it's resonating. I want to play a little bit of Vice President Harris on Donald Trump's sales tax. This was Friday in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
His answer to the financial pressures you face is the same as it was the last time. Another $1 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires and the biggest corporations. This time he will pay for it with a 20% national sales tax on everything you buy that is imported. Clothes, foods, toys, cell phones. A Trump sales tax that would cost the average American family, the economists have measured it, more than $4,000 more a year.
It's given laser focus on the things Americans care about, Claire.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think she's also going for some of those squishy Republicans with this argument. Because, as I've said a number of times, I think about 1/3 of the people voting for Trump don't believe what he says about using the military against American citizens, about mass deportation. But he can do tariffs without Congress. And the more she talks about this and the economic disruption that would occur, I mean, even Musk has admitted there will be a massive economic disruption if their plans are put into place. Now, he says it'll recover and everything will be fine. But to most Americans that are voting for Trump, they don't believe in what he says. They do believe they're going to keep their tax cut. But many of them are very educated and many of them are very wealthy. And I think when they start really digesting what the economists have said about Trump's plans and what it would do to the economy, I think she may be not only appealing to America's families with some of her specific plans, but also maybe appealing to some of those Republicans who don't like Trump that are just voting to keep their tax cut.
I think the exciting part about this stage of the campaign, and it's something that Democrats have throughout modern history been very, very good at, is sort of using friends to come in and sort of contextualize the sometimes complicated political narrative. Yeah, Cardi B last night sort of breaking it down for a lot of folks. And let's take a quick listen to her in Milwaukee talking about the conning of by Donald Trump.
Tomorrow, he'll be conning you out of your health care rights. And that's a fact. I want you to hear that again. Today, he's hustling you with buy my sneakers. Tomorrow is going to be your health care rights. He's going to take it away from you. He's going to snatch it. Donald Trump talks about how he has a concept of a plan, But America, the only concept of a plan he has is a plan to hustle you.
And that's been Donald Trump's MO from back in the day in the 1980s in New York. I mean, it's always about the hustle. And to sort of put that out there, I think, with real voices, matters at this stage of the game, particularly for a lot of young voters who are voting for the first time or just coming into this process and really trying to contextualize these complicated plans around health care and things like. The bottom line is he's giving you sneakers. She's talking about keeping your health care.
Yeah, and I, the sad thing for me is that I think the pandemic wiped out people's memory of the first 2 years of the Trump term. I remember it well. I was a United States Senator at the time. I remember how hard he worked to try to overturn everything in Obamacare, from protecting you on pre-existing conditions to letting your kids stay on your plans till they're 26. He wanted to wipe all of it out, and he came this close. But you know what he didn't come close on? Building a wall. You know what he didn't come close on? Immigration reform. You know what he didn't come close on? All of the stuff he's talking about now. He failed, and he had a Republican Congress. He had a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and he couldn't get the wall built. And by the way, Mexico didn't pay a dime. So if you're hustled once, back in 2016,
right.
it's like the pandemic wiped out the memory. You were hustled once, and now you're going, sign me up again. I want to be hustled again. Con me, lie to me. I'm down.
Can I just say my favorite tweet was from you, Simone, on this, which is imagining the conversation between the comms staff on the Harris campaign and the person who actually works with Cardi, being like, what's she going to say?
What's she gonna say?
Can we see some remarks?
It's all right here, baby. Claire, we want you to stick
They're
around.
like, Cardi gonna read from that. She's gonna read from that phone, honey. Claire McCaskill Claire's in here on a riff, y'all. She preaching.
I love it.
I just would like to note that Cardi B said she was not going to vote this election.
Yes.
And when Vice President Harris became the top of the ticket, Cardi B said, she feels like she needs to get engaged and get involved, and she's concerned about her health care. Something is happening here.
Yeah.